And thank you, Joy, for inviting us to your forum today. From the Belly, Poets Respond to Gertrude Stein's Tender Buttons is a 3-book project based on 3 sections of Tender Buttons: objects, food, and rooms. Volume 1, which is this book that EJ just showed you. I don't know if I held that up so you could see it, but you already saw it. Anyway, it features the artwork of Grace Cavallari, who's also in this collection, and it follows the order of Stein's subpoems in the objects section, and the reading will do the same. So in this reading, we're going to showcase 5 Tender Button poems and responses from today's 5 readers, who are Jacqueline Johnson, Roger Sederot, Margot Stever, Nancy White, and me. And I will read Stein's Tender Buttons poem for each responding poet, which will help you then distinguish Stein from the responding poet. So here we go. I've asked each of the readers to start with a soundbite of bio and a signature poem, or one that is a particular favorite from their own work. That way you will learn something more about the poet responding to Gertrude Stein's work. To conclude the individual readings, I've also asked the poet to say something about their process in writing the response poem. So here goes. I am Karen Lalonde Alanier of Chevy Chase, Maryland, the first poet published by The Word Works in 1975. And in 2023, I am the editor of From the Belly, Poets Respond to Gertrude Stein's Tender Buttons. Writing opera libretti is something else that I do, and I collaborated with composer Bill Banfield and director Nancy Rhodes to create the successful New York City premiere of Gertrude Stein Invents a Jump early on. So my signature poem, which comes from the Stein opera, as I call it, is Leo on Seesaw. Leo on seesaw for the pleasure of Gertrude Stein. Little Buddha, little brooder, kleiner brooder, tiny brother, bitty bother, sitting baldly in the butter, in the batter, shaking philosophic digits in the kitchen, for the Küchen has been eaten by the kitten, wearing mittens in the winter, hiding splinters in his fingers, finding spiders in the cracks of the plaster. So we laughed 20 ha 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 in metered breathing, something close to the day he was born. All right, then. So the sub-poem of Tender Buttons that I have responded to is Dirt and Not Copper. This is by Gertrude Stein. Dirt and not copper makes a color darker. It makes the shape so heavy and makes no melody harder. It makes mercy and relaxation and even a strength to spread a table fuller. There are more places not empty. They see cover. And here is my response. And the poem is called The Entrance, a count-off in 8s. The kitchen is shredding, it disposes the reed, slender leaf stalk, tall in evening, light, shorter indifference, imputes clacking beads, like chickens that fight, like soaping cups, queer to slight slippery, as flat porcelain, sweeter than fat, a flute without flirt, so tone deaf. Regarding my process, difference and otherness are reflected in the word dirt. which Gertrude Stein used frequently in Tender Buttons. Recognize that Stein was dealing with the culturally unacceptable same-sex love for Alice Toklas, which created their otherness. Also recognize that dirt is not just the state of uncleanliness. From dirt comes objects that we eat, which make a table fuller. For me, Dirt and Not Copper is a poem situated in the kitchen. And for me, there is a certain life-affirming music created in the kitchen. You, dear audience, can hear it when the blender switches on, when we imagine how chickens sound before they are slaughtered for our dinners, when we pass through the beads in a rural town that keeps the flies out of our soup. So our next poet is Roger Sederot. So Roger, please take the stage.
Thank you, Karen. To introduce myself, Roger Sederot, author of Dear Regime, Letters to the Islamic Republic, and Ghazal Games, both by Ohio University Press. And then, very proudly, Hajia's Puppet in Orientalist Burlesque, which won the WordWorks 10th Gate Prize in 2017. And just a shout out to the anthology. I'm so glad to be a part of this, Karen. Barbara Goldberg and I, both translators also, were saying how much we appreciated the dialectical nature of this book, that you can see on each page the response to the original. It's wonderful. So for my signature poem, I took the inspiration poem. I hope I didn't break the rules, but it's Gertrude Stein, so we can break the rules, right? I've kind of been obsessed with this, this new MFA student in my poetry workshop submission. The assignment was a low stakes poem, so we don't workshop it, to violate or to interrupt the poem. And that could be a language disruption, a grammatical disruption, spatial disruption. And Xiao, it's very short. So just the introduction, Xiao Chen, he's a new immigrant from China. He spent 3 years in complete forced lockdown, couldn't see his fiance, and now they're both in the United States. And his pet theme is this tension with his fiance. They struggle. She'll read a poem he wrote about a flower and think it's about their marriage and fight. And it's hysterical. And he's just the most charming. He looks like he's 16. He has these, thick glasses. Oh, and why I'm sharing this. I haven't written poems, admittedly, in a long time. I've been doing translation and theory, and the magic hasn't been there. And this kid is kind of bringing it back for me. He's obsessed with Rimbaud, like you're supposed to be when you're young. He tries to copy him. So this poem, it's called Gamophobia, which is the fear of marriage. And I'll try to do his interruptions justice. Gamophobia. I'm afraid of marriage, afraid of losing personal space, afraid of fights, endless fightless fights, afraid of fighting poverty. She is C, is D, is C, is B, is a spendthrift. I'm afraid of her, afraid of marrying me. That lush body, swelling lips, that lovely face, seducing lips. I'm afraid of losing that entertaining personality, X-inclusive personal bodity. She is A, is B, is C, is D, is E, emotional unstable. She is a modern shellfish woman. I just love it. My wife can't stand poetry, hearing me read it 30 years. I read her that and she's like, send me that. I want to read that poem. So I responded to A Box, and I guess Karen reads that first.
Yes, A Box by Gertrude Stein. A large box is handily made of what is necessary to replace any substance. Suppose an example is necessary. The plainer it is made, the more reason there is for some outward recognition that there is a result. A box is made sometimes, and them to see to it neatly, and to have the holes stopped up makes it necessary to use paper. A custom which is necessary when a box is used and taken is that a large part of the time there are three which have different connections. The one is on the table, the two are on the table, the three are on the table, the one is the same as is shown by the cover being longer. The other is different. There is more cover that shows it. The other is different, and that makes the corners have the same shade. The 8 are in singular arrangement to make 4 necessary. Lacks to have corners to be lighter than some weight, to indicate a wedding journey, to last brown and not curious, to be wealthy. Cigarettes are established by length and by doubling. Left open, to be left pounded, to be left closed, to be circulating in summer and winter, and sick color, that is gray, that is not dusty, and red shows. To be sure, cigarettes do measure an empty length sooner than a choice of in color. Winged, to be winged means that white is yellow and pieces that are brown are dust color. If dust is washed off, then it is choice. That is to say, it is fitting cigarettes sooner than paper. An increase. Why is an increase idle? Why is silver cloister? Why is the spark brighter? If it is brighter, is there any result? Hardly more than ever.
A box. Even unfilled, a box contains, inside, out, opening amorphously, as an untethered A, as in a pack of cigarettes, unwrapped in a bed, alone in a room. A list, personal belongings from a box, as if all is accounted for, a silver lighter, a folded blouse, etc. Or else uneventful origami, wings unfolded, leaving the banality of brown dust under an unmade bed. And as far as my process, from the first line on, Stein seems to invite me as a reader to consider displacements. She awakens aesthetically in my verse this kind of Hegelian sensibility I use as a theorist in my own academic writing. Rather than figuring out a process, it's more like as a poet, I ultimately surrender to her kind of negative relation. We tend to think of space in verse between stanzas or even words, assuming the text arrives to fill the space up. Yet tangible language in a Stein poem like this, like the one I'm responding to, it's like the Tao in Eastern wisdom, surfaces as an empty vessel, a kind of agency predicated not so much on active power, but on a passive allowing for the poetry to come. So that's my take. And now I have the good pleasure to introduce Jacqueline Johnson, our next poet responding to A Tender Button's Object.
Hi, greetings, everyone. What a joy to finally get to this reading. We've been talking about this, or at least I've been exchanging emails with Karen for months now. So I'm really happy to see this happening, finally getting in the world. And it is such a beautiful book. You'll be mad with yourself if you don't get a copy. That's all I'm going to say. I am Jacqueline Johnson, a multidiscipline artist in writing and fiber arts. I am the author of A Woman's Season from Main Street Rag Press, and A Gathering of Mother Tongues, winner of the 3rd annual White Pine Press Award. I'm going to read, my signature poem is Sister Suki. I believe you came right out of the stars. Skin the color of eggplant, carried 2 braids, covered your head. It was always something to watch your healer's hand turn a piece of scrap cloth into a broken slave chain, wedding band, strip quilt. You patched uneven squares of your mother's thunder, transformed yourself into an elegant African broadcloth, becoming fertile, healing, like an aquabana dancing around a slender waist in wind. I remember you worked 3 jobs, two that should have gone to men. When you gave your baby back, some of the light went out of you, though you had a seer's eye, seeing auras around plants and babies, talking about times 20 years from now. It must have been a struggle to be around regular folks. You took those nobody wants you children, enduring bites, tantrum kicks, to get one word of understanding, of knowingness out of them. More than queen bee, diva, or high priestess, you wore earth shoes, chewing a licorice stick, talking long yin about cleansing, healing our body, our minds. Put the tongue of understanding on all of us. We black eyed Susans blossoming, coming Delta strong, your spirit a precious medallion around our lives. And I think you're up, Karen. And I want to say I responded to A New Cup and Saucer.
A New Cup and Saucer by Gertrude Stein. Enthusiastically herding a clouded yellow bud and saucer. Enthusiastically, so is the bite in the ribbon.
Okay. Entwine. To be the roundness of the bowl and the bowl itself, container of words, ideas, overflow, knowing Alice would be there to receive your brilliance and open it to the world. Every plate, cup, and saucer has a function, a duty if only to simply revel in the dance of the divine. Elegant underlife, you're secreted between you against the gritty predictable of the conventional. Whom needed whom more? Blazing moment Gertrude met you for the first time, having recognized each other in new forms. The soul gaze, like the meeting of Shams and Rumi. Paris, where you two walked the labyrinth, going from stranger to friend. The golden thread Alice carried charged you so much you would follow it to your dying breath. What was the answer you sought in each other? Alice protected the yellow bud blossom, never letting artists, men, or other women stay for too long. Knew better than Ariane never to sleep away from to sleep life away. Some thought your aspiration was art making, cultivating its twisted lit chord in others, to create a new blur reality, upend lines, joy, gift of a lifetime. And I'll just say that for me, my process had to do with learning more about Gertrude and Alice and their relationship. So I started with research. Within this poem, there's a bit of myth um, and uh, and just a touch of the history that they were dealing with. But I for me, their relationship had a very strong spiritual undercurrent. So that's why I refer to Shams and Rumi. Um, but when I tried to find the heart of this poem, I thought of relationship. A cup and a saucer have a relationship. They support each other in one way or another. So that was really the grounding for me. Um, and I'd like to introduce you to the next poet, Nancy White, who is our next poet responding to tender button objects.
Thank you, Jackie. That's me, Nancy White. I have 3 poetry collections: Sun, Moon, Salt, which won the Washington Prize about 1,000 years ago. Detour is the second collection, and Ask Again Later, most recently. I'm a teacher, but also serve as president and co-editor-in-chief with my very beloved Karen Alanier at the WordWorks. I had a hard time choosing a signature poem, but there's one that felt right, so right while I was writing it, and has never stopped feeling right. So I'll read you that one. It's called Woven and Sewn. You are no virgin. Listen, you must stop here. Sit on the curb and look like a bum. Hold still until you feel it too. There is a no rising in you like clear sap, like power. Do not drill in your side. The world is not asking for this. You are meant to stream upwards. No compromise, only pause. Sit in the dirt of the road until you see. If it takes years, it takes years. This will cost less than the life you would drain from your side. If you are hungry, sleepless, cold, it is nothing to the other suffering. There is no such have to, that lie. We told it once too. Do not be ashamed. You are part of this fabric, woven and sewn, but not this, what you contemplate willingly today. You may hate us for these words. It passes. Believe you are the one in danger. Sit down. I was delighted when Karen assigned me Water Raining to respond to, since water is one of my favorite things.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Nancy. Water Raining by Gertrude Stein. Water, astonishing and difficult, altogether makes a meadow and a stroke.
Water. The hands of water are feet deep. The water handle dubbed paddle will betray the bubble, but don't grow floaty, friend. For if nipple all swam the womb, you'd be sorry. Fleeing the shudder of its over, remember we were foreign for the first time? Fast our drop adrowned beneath, oh cradle, and we don't want to speak it, be in it. A minute ago I was, but now I'm out and fail. You want to say about water, which wastes the shallow. The neighbors say it too, and they're gone. Next year, last year, we say, and sink. Green warns the size, and you, my smash and fluster. Blue, the only equidistance. So about process, I sat for days with water, astonishing and difficult altogether, makes a meadow and a stroke. You can't figure out Gertrude Stein the way you figure out other things. I sat with this a long time, and it felt so complete and kind of self-encapsulating, and it seemed like it would not let me enter. But after days of thinking about it, I went down to some water, large water that I think of as mine, although it's really everybody's, and just stayed with it, on it, in it, under it, and then tried to translate it somehow into what maybe it is to we humans without violating this challenge from Stein, which seemed to me to be to put something that comes from far beyond language into language without doing damage to where this thing was traveling from. As ego strong as Stein herself seems, I think her approach is to take yourself completely out of the process while still having this rock solid center. And it's sort of like understanding relativity, like you get it for a minute and then it's gone. So I hope I did her, some fragment of justice in there. Margot Stever is our last poet responding to Tender Button's objects. Take it away, Margot.
Thank you, Nancy. Great to see you. Nancy and I were at Sarah Lawrence together, getting an MFA many centuries ago. And thank you, Karen, for including my poem in this wonderful anthology. My 3 full-length poetry collections are The End of Horses, Broadstone Books, 2022, which was one of 3 winners of the 2022 Pinnacle Achievement Book Award and a 2023 NYC Big Book Award Distinguished Favorite. Crack Piano, Calvin Carey Press, 2019, which was shortlisted and received honorable mention for the 2021 Eric Hoffer Grand Award Grand Prize, and Frozen Spring, Midlist Press, 2002, First Series Award for Poetry. I'm the founder of the Hudson Valley Writers Center and founding and current co-editor of Slappering Hall Press. And I wanted to read for my signature poem, a poem that I actually wrote in a writing workshop at the Hudson Valley Writers Center, taught by Karen Alanier, probably about 10 years ago, maybe 15. I don't know if Karen, if you remember when it was, but it was on Gertrude Stein. So I thought, and it actually is one of my favorite poems, oddly enough. So I thought I'd read it, and it's titled Idiot's Guide to Counting. How do you become one with the horse riding and becoming the act of riding, and the horse becoming the self and the other at exactly the same second, counting strides, counting muscle movement, counting fences, hurtling over them with the horse, counting the everything of one? How do you count? How do you pull a muscle turning over in bed at night, measurements that change everything, counting back to everything, the everything of one, the pulled muscles of the back of one, the entanglement of one, the waves of particles counting back, the quantum? How to become one with the branches of a tree, a grandfather tree in an apple orchard that no longer exists. Separate one from tree, horse, counting numbers, counting the grandfather tree to find the solution of one. Counting trees, leaves, counting everything as no longer existing, counting trees as one with the everything that no longer exists. And now I think Karen's going to read the Gertrude Stein poem that I responded to.
And that is book. How about that? I mean, you have to know that Tender Buttons is about her babies, which is books. So here we go. Book by Gertrude Stein. Book was there. It was there. Book was there. Stop it. Stop it. It was a cleaner, a wet cleaner. And it was not where it was wet. It was not high. It was directly placed back, not back again, back. It was returned. It was needless. It put a bank when a bank care. Suppose a man, realistic expression of resolute reliability suggests pleasing itself white, all white, and no head. Does that mean soap? It does not so. It means kind wavers and little chance to beside rest a plane. Suppose earrings, that is one way to breed. Breed that. Oh, chance to say, oh, nice old pole. Next best and nearest a pillar. Chest, not valuable. Be papered. Cover up the two with a little piece of string and hope, rose, and green. Please a plate, put a match to the seam, and really then, it is a remark that joins many lead games. It is a sister, and a flower, and a dog, and a colored sky, a sky colored gray, and nearly that, let. Back to you, Margot.
No book. Only a few humans living in northern Canada. No books. A few humans. No banks either. No banks left. The run on banks dried the banks up. No green. Conflagration in the west, then the east. Flood first, then fires. Some black, same black. The ocean used to be so vast and blue. The dry, unreliable raised land, the dust, the dry, cracked wheat buckling, this individual aridity, the raw end of futility, the futile rawness of the end. How can we survive? Everyone is infected, infecting others. Everyone is exposed, boneward, exposed inside and out. There is no stopping it. Until I get some confirmation, I refuse to go on and on writing down these solitary words on this solitary page in this room without flowers. Until I get some confirmation, I refuse to go on with this solitary confinement, inventing the improbable, this improbable solitary confinement without dogs, in which I am never alone, in which there is always noise, small crackling sounds, eerie sounds, creatures but not dogs, poking elongated noses out of bags. Inside my closet, and I always try to keep the door shut, small mountains of intensity, and no one will ever acknowledge it. They always look as if nothing is there while I point to it. And as far as process, first of all, I guess this was written during the pandemic, and I had the opportunities to sit on a porch overlooking a small lake, Bisbee Lake in the Adirondacks, a few summers ago after Karen had given me the assignment to write the poem, taking off from the Stein poem that she just read. And I was thinking about the worldwide struggles to preserve democracy that is waging in so many places, the possibility of imprisonment, and about climate change and the devastation of species. Basically, I was thinking about what would have concerned Stein in our day and age, and decided that is what I would attempt to document in my poem.
Well, that is really interesting, because I think that this is the kind of conversation I think Gertrude would have enjoyed, you know, that her work would bring us to meaningful exchange. And I feel like we've had quite a tour in the selection of buttons and responses, from my noisy, dirt-inspired kitchen to Roger's cinematic, noir, dusty bedroom where someone is poised to smoke a cigarette, to Jacqueline's existential and possibly divine dining room, to Nancy's colorful and wet womb, and finally Margot's, I want to say, armchair, telling but no, her voice comes from that small mountain of intensity, the closet, and the depiction of a world, our world, gone to ruin and the apocalypse. And I want to thank EJ and her community for this time to explore Tender Buttons. And if there's time for questions, I think now is the time to do that.
Yes, we do have time for questions, and so I'm going to start. And this is for each of the readers. In your response to Gertrude Stein, what did you do to ensure that you didn't overthink the Stein poem that you were using for inspiration, so as not to lose that sense of play in your response poem?
I guess I'll start first, because I have a lot more responses than everybody else in this book. I think that's a really hard question to answer, because I don't know that I think about overthinking. What I'm really concerned about is getting my way into something that makes that has some kind of connection to the words that she has put on her page, and that I'm more concerned with finding the passion and what's underneath her abstractions, so that we know that she was writing in code in a lot of ways. So what's underneath of what she's doing. So I wasn't worried about overthinking. I was concerned, not worried, but concerned that I got to the heart of something that mattered to her and what she was putting on her page.
Mm-hmm.
Roger, how about you? What do you think?
That's a really good question, and also a hard question. My off the top of my head answer is the imitation with there's that danger that you're going to get too close and just bad mimicry. And so, I was conscious of that, and I read it a few times. I know Tender Buttons anyway, but then I deliberately kind of felt the sensibility, let it hit me holistically, and then kind of set it aside as I ruminated and I got it. In other words, I got in the sensibility of the poem without trying to get too close to the literal, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Margot? Oh, go ahead, Jackie.
I'll just say I found myself on my knees to history and to and to the spirit of their relationship. That was really important to me to reach for that in my work, in the poem. Because I feel like this poem, the A New Cup and Saucer, is very coded. So I very much wanted to uncode it and lift it up. That that's the best I could do with that.
I'll say that if Stein is coded, and nobody gave me the secret decoder ring, so it's hard to overthink it because I can't figure her out. So you just have to go into the place the language takes you, and in a way, it's a wonderful freedom. And one of the things this book does is leave blank space for the reader to also respond. There's space for whoever is reading to be the third leg of this stool. There's Stein, there's a poet, and then there's a space that the reader can enter and try to do their own, I don't want to use the word penetration because that would be just wrong for Gertrude Stein, their own sort of floating in whatever they're getting from her.
It is a good question, and the question of overthinking. I never really thought of overthinking, only because I feel like it was through contemplation that I could write the poem, and I just was trying to understand the meaning and what it meant to me, and what she was trying to say. And of course, as Nancy says, it's very difficult to understand Gertrude Stein a lot of times. But so I just, I think contemplation was the way I wrote the poem, through contemplation. And I don't know whether I did too much of that or not. Who knows?
Did in writing your response, did her work help you to increase your spontaneity in your writing?
I'll start answering that, and I would say yes, because it often took me to places that I hadn't been before. And one of the things that's wonderful about Tender Buttons is that it's abstract, like a piece of abstract art on the wall. And you go into one little space and you figure out, you really do feel the cubism that she was influenced by, because you get different perspectives on how to enter. And so, I keep thinking of the meadow and the stroke that Nancy was up against, because those are big concepts in my mind, and yet that particular Tender Button is just so tiny in the sense of the number of words that are there. So maybe Nancy, you want to say something on that same theme?
I think the tininess of it was definitely part of what made it challenging. A, I'm a wordy person, and B, if you're decoding a language, The more of that language you have, the easier it is to decode. But I love the balance of meadow and stroke, because meadow is an open space and it's created by nature, and stroke is a very finite, small mark, and it needs a maker to make that mark. And she's somewhere in the space between those two things. She's neither one, or she's both at the same time. For me, she just defies categorization, and that she can still do that this much after having created her work. It's just stunning, you know.
Karen, I have a question for you. As the editor for this anthology, what inspired you to use this call and response format that you set up? Because some people would do the anthology and they would just put the Tender Button poem at the front and then everybody else's poems after it. But you chose to break it up into pieces, which makes this it makes it a call and response reading type of, whether you're reading it silently to yourself or aloud. So what inspired you to use that format as opposed to the more standard one?
Well, my philosophy is that you don't go into the Steinian woods alone. And so that being the case, you want to take on these buttons one at a time, and you want to, get intimate and friendly with each one. And so you can't do that if they're over here and the other people are over there. That doesn't work. You got to bring them together. So the call and response, which I love, thank you for that. Call and response really helps, develop a sense of what Tender Buttons is about. And so if you're teaching Tender Buttons, you want some way to, get in. And there's a lot of different ways that you can get in. So, one response is not enough. You can do more. And that's what Nancy was talking about, so that the reader can take out their pencil and start writing a response of the readers, so that's what we want to do. We want to get people in conversation with these pieces.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good segue. I want to get our viewers in response to our readers. So if anyone else out there has a question, please unmute yourself and speak right up. No questions. Oh,
Poets are always so shy.
I know. I can't believe that there's no questions out there.
I have a question, but okay.
Go ahead.
Since I don't have the book in front of me, and I don't, but I've been listening very carefully to the poems that were written in response to Gertrude Stein's work. I was just, some of you already answered this in bits and pieces, but what initially drew you? I suppose I should ask this to Karen, but more directly, because as editor, how this project, how did it initiate itself? I mean, how did you? It was something like Tender Buttons, a part of something that you have known for a long time, and you wanted to see other people's reactions to it, or other poets' reactions to it, or I mean, what in Stein's poetry inspires this collection?
Okay, so that's a good question, and it's an important question to this particular anthology project. And that is that I started working with an international group of people inside the massive open online course that Al Filreis developed from the University of Pennsylvania called Modern and Contemporary American Poetry, which is nicknamed ModPo. And so for a number of years, we, the international community online inside the discussion forums, were talking about what the words of each of these subpoems meant. And we actually went through Tender Buttons and did all kinds of odd things. Like we related the first 10 tender buttons to the 10 commandments and talked about how the tender buttons corresponded to the commandments. We did all kinds of things where we took things apart and put them back together, and we found all this research on different things, like there was a camera that showed the image upside down, all kinds of unusual things. And so I started writing all my, writing poems in response to this. And I thought to myself, well, I can write poems, until the cows come home, but I need some other people doing this with me. And so, then I said to Nancy, okay, I've got this idea, and what do you think? And so, it was a project that was meant to be, relative to, helping people break open the box that is Tender Buttons. And by the way, there are 2 boxes in the object section. Did you know that, Roger? Yeah. So anyway, that's ModPo was an instrumental part, and some of the people who participated in ModPo are in the collection as well. I wanted to also say that I have everybody in this particular anthology, from a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet to a young poet who won our high school competition. So we had everybody, all kinds of people, all different ages. Anything goes. And I wanted people to see that anybody could have a wonderful response to Gertrude Stein.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have a question from AJ.
Okay.
She says, have you ever thought of adding artwork to this book where a painting or sculpture could be undertaken in response to the poems by Stein?
I mean, that's a project for another day, and somebody with a good wallet, in hand. But I think that, people have done those kinds of things. I was actually part of a artistic response to Tender Buttons that was done by Stanford University in Washington, D.C. And I put on a workshop there in conjunction with the artwork that was created for that particular show. So yes, there are lots of things that have happened. One of the things that I want to say about the project is that most people start with objects, and then the whole thing fizzles. They don't know what to do next. And in order to make the second volume interesting, you really need to meditate on what it is that you've got and how it works. And so each volume has its own character, as it does each section of Tender Buttons.
Have you done the second volume?
The second volume, as I was saying, is in layout. So we have artwork for it, and the artwork is from Joanne McFarlane, who was one of the WordWorks authors, who was like Jacqueline. We have many artists in our community, who are both visual artists and writing artists. So yeah, so it's an exciting time. I think that the cover art for the second volume is dramatically, what shall we say, Nancy? Shocking.
I think it does an amazing job of spanning history, and while it's being both beautiful, organic, and man-made. It combines a lot of interesting Steinian contradictions, I think. Yeah.
Karen,
Well-
you said that Gertrude Stein was influenced by Cubism, and I was wondering if you could talk a little more about that.
Okay, so Gertrude Stein and her brother Leo had collected many paintings by Picasso, and it was during his period when he turned to Cubism that Gertrude Stein was inspired by that, and that she wanted to write from different perspectives. And she wanted to distinguish herself. She had had these conversations with her Harvard professor years before, William James, about how do you become a genius? She was interested in becoming a genius, and it was a topic that was discussed among, her peers in the literary world, yeah, how do you become a genius? You have to distinguish yourself. It can't be ordinary. It has to be outside of that box. There has to be something that's different. And also it needs to be pointed out that Tender Buttons is a one-of-a-kind work. She never did another work that was like Tender Buttons. It was a very, very unusual piece. And I think she was influenced actually by the French poet Guillaume Apollinaire. And I have my various theories about those kinds of things, but and he unfortunately he died. He enlisted in World War I. He was injured. He was hit in the head and trepanned, had some kind of metal in his head, and he caught the flu, I think during the epidemic, 1918, and he died. I think that if he had lived, there would have been more of Tender Buttons kind of work from Gertrude Stein. That's just a theory.
I have another question. Oh, go ahead, sir.
Okay, Karen, could you talk a little bit about, I understand that there are it's a complicated code, and there are lots of references to more than just Picasso and Apollinaire. There are references to Shakespeare, to the Talmud. Could you talk a little bit about what kinds of things are built into this work?
Oh, thank you, Luther, for that question. One of the things that most academics will tell you is that there are no literary allusions in Gertrude Stein's work, but it's not exactly true. What is there is she points to certain things, and you get the feeling that certain things are pointed to, like Talmud, like Shakespeare. She also, sometimes she was more direct than not. She did a novel that was hidden from view for a long time, where she took a whole page from As You Like It. And so she actually had used Shakespeare. But I was documenting some of the ways that Stein had used Shakespeare in Tender Buttons. I can't, give you any examples just off the top of my head. I'd have to go back to my blog posts. But I also was documenting to a certain degree the influence that I believed Melville had on her work. And I think that, Nancy was talking about her water imagery, and that she was glad that water imagery was what she got to respond to. But I found that the water imagery, the way Stein handled it, wasn't typical, because typically in Western literature, water is a feminine image, but for Stein, it was a masculine feel to it. And I was thinking, how did this happen? And then I started to see that there was a correlation between Moby Dick and Tender Buttons. And when I saw that, then I understood what she was doing with water. It was really quite remarkable. but you have to go, Luther, sort of line by word. It's not line by line, but word by word, because these are prose poems, and you have to find the connections in there. There's also, a fair amount of violence in Tender Buttons, and I'm right now in the middle of reading the Iliad, the new translation by Emily Wilson. And I'm seeing like there's a connection. I feel like there's a connection to the epic, that Tender Buttons has an epic quality to it. And, but I'm saying that she pointed to things, she didn't quote them.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Karen, could you describe how the poets were assigned their part of the poem?
Okay.
Yeah, did you say to yourself, oh, Nancy likes water?
Well, here's how I did it. Here's how I did the assignment like this. Okay, so I put numbers or I put names of the poems on one set of cards, and I put, I started going through I tried to get everybody lined up to do this at the same time in the volume 1. And so I just mixed them all up, and I started randomly picking out things for people. And and objects, it was all random assignments, totally random assignments. And I didn't assign anything that I had, written a poem to. I just, those were out. But, basically I felt that, this was a project that needed to show that anybody could write anything, and you didn't have to assign somebody a particular work. But in volume 2, there is a controversial poem that uses the N word. And although people have decided, at least, people that I'm reading with, that it's not a pejorative, negative citation, N-word, I decided that I needed to carefully pick who would answer that. And so I picked somebody who had Shakespearean experience. I didn't even realize that at the time, and who I felt had a very highly developed sense of spirituality. And I said, okay, do you think you could write to this? And that's how that happened. But everybody else I did at random, although I did pick out some of the longer pieces and, tried to assign them to people who were more solidly grounded in literature, because I did have some people who would back out every now and again, saying that they just couldn't do it. They just really didn't know how to do it. And I did talk some people off the ceiling, like, of course you can do this. I know you can do this. You're very good. You're a great writer, and how about this and that, and, so some people said, oh, okay, I can do it, and then changed their minds. But there were some people who backed out, and you just have to let them back out. And there were other people who could do whatever is necessary.
I have not read Tender Buttons, so exactly how long is the poem? I mean, because I've read some of Walt Whitman's poems, and his poems go on for pages and pages and pages. One poem could be a book.
Yeah, well, here is the centennial version of Tender Buttons, and I used this copy as the watchdog for the whole project, because Seth Perlow went through and he matched up all the manuscripts and everything, and he picked out what he felt was the most authentic work, because there was some editing that was done. And anyway, but like there are, like, I don't know, maybe 80 sub poems in some of these sections, something like that. And you know, the kicker is that the last part of it, rooms, is not done in sub poems. It's one long stream of stanzas. And so what I did with that was very different. I decided, I started reading it very intensely, and I saw that there was something underneath these, you know, like a story underneath the stanza. So I grouped some of them together, and I said, okay, I'm going to assign several stanzas, and I want people to write 2 or 3 interlinked poems for that. So that's a different way of approaching this altogether.
Interesting. Are there any other questions?
Well, I'm pleased that we had such a nice audience. We have some people in the audience who actually wrote for volume 1, and you know, and some, I think we have maybe one person at least who's written for volume 2. So we have a few people here who are intimately, you know, connected. Actually, a couple people for volume 2. Yep. Anyway, I mean, thank you for your questions. They really were challenging and wonderful to talk about. And I hope that you have a good recording so that we can go back and review these answers and questions and answers. Thank you.
We usually have a good recording, and we will be sending it to you, so you can look at it. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for coming out this afternoon to listen to this anthology reading. And I thought it was a very, as I said, this anthology is really kind of fun, you know, to look at, especially if you're into any kind of wordplay. This is really a fun thing book to be reading. And I want to thank Karen and Roger and Nancy and Jackie and Margot for reading their work for us. Thank you so much. And Karen, we look forward to volume 2.
Okay.
I can't wait to see what Joanne comes up with.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. What a lovely evening.
Yes. And everybody, please, if you're in Brooklyn on December 10th, please come out and support One Breath Rising. We are going to have a live poetry and music performance. Our poet, working in collaboration with a musician, will be Patricia Spears Jones, and Ross Moshe is our instrumentalist. So please continue to look at our website, and if you haven't already, sign up for our email list, and we will have that information out for you as to how you can get tickets for that. And we also will be live streaming it. So if you're not in Brooklyn, you can get in on the live stream. Okay. And again, that will be December 10th. So I'm turning it over to Joy to take us out.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. This was lovely. What a wonderful evening, and what a wonderful project. And I think that's all I have to say. We hope you'll join our mailing list, and we'll tell you about more events that we're doing like this. And we hope to see you in person on December 10th.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye.